Hello, guys. Welcome to another episode of Control or Be Controlled, the podcast designed to help you start thinking differently and take control of your life. And as always, I remain your host, Darlington. And today we have a very special guest. As always, we know the show is always about and special guests. So today's guest is Mark Jamilkowski.
Very good.
Mark Jamil. Okay, the way I pronounce your name, right?
Yeah. You did a good job.
Okay, I think that's because I watch a lot of football, probably some Polish players. All right, so Mark is a historical fiction author, entrepreneur, and passionate researcher whose novels bring forgotten moments of history vividly to life. Mark is the author of The Road to Moresco, a deeply personal novel inspired by his search for his birth mother, and Marks of Romulus, an immersive story exploring the fascinating relationship between Rome and India. Known for his meticulous historical research and emotionally rich storytelling, Mark creates narratives that connect readers not only to history, but also to the universal themes of identity, family, courage, and belonging. Mark, once again, welcome to Control or Be Controlled.
My pleasure to be with you here today, Darlington. Looking forward to the conversation.
All right, Mark. So I would like us to get into the show.
Yes.
First, I need to point out you are Polish, right?
I am half Polish, half Italian, yes. Slavic. Let's go with Slavic. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's all from that same general area. The questionable zonings and what are boundaries after all, right?
Because my brain has attached. Anytime I see somebody with the name Ski at the end of this, I have attached it to Polish.
Absolutely. Oh, that's a good guess. Absolutely. It's my father was Polish, most definitely. So it's you mentioned my birth mother. By virtue of being adopted, my adoptive parents, Polish and Italian. From a genetics DNA perspective, I'm personally more Slovenian, but it's still Slavic, and so it works out.
Okay. So, Mark, what first inspired you to write The Road to Moresco, and how much of the story was shaped by your own personal journey?
Yeah, a lot of it was. The whole idea behind Road to Moresco was really my effort to find my birth mother. And when I met her, I learned about her life story. Some of the things that she lived. Now, she was born in 1937, and her mother was born in 1910. When I started learning more about their lives, what it was like to grow up in Italy, first in the early 1900s, and then later, by virtue of being married to a famous violin player, moving around Germany, being in Poland before the collapse of the Eastern Front and the Russians coming in and the collapse of Germany in World War II. She lived through that. Learning about her life, how she met a GI, married an American soldier, ended up coming back to the United States with him, and the relationship and life that she had here from that point forward in the mid-1960s, early 1960s, was just fascinating to me. It was a lot of personal reflection on history and what she lived through that made me want to tell her story. I wanted people to know what they lived through. I wanted people to know them. So it's biographical. but it's also historical fiction because I don't have direct access to a lot of the people. I had to fill in a lot of gaps with presumption and supposition. And where I had to apply my imagination is where my own personal childhood traumas, whatever shaped me as an adult, ultimately ended up being in the book more as a means that I was using to become empathetic with whatever they were going through at that moment in time. So you'll see a young boy playing on the curb in a puddle of water, and he's floating a stick in the water. I'm channeling a moment in my childhood, that kind of stuff. How would they deal with this circumstance? I don't know specifically. I try to channel what they would be like as people, but you get the idea. There's a lot of me in that book, and it was important to publish the book for those reasons. It helped me get more in touch with myself and helped me better connect where that history of these women's lives ultimately led to my creation, like dominoes, led fate, destiny, whatever you want to call it. It's fascinating stuff. And I thought it deserved its own medium. So that's why I made a book out of it.
Moving on. Every author's publishing journey is different. How did you go from finishing a manuscript to getting your book published? And what did you learn along the way?
I actually didn't set out to write a book. My conversation with my birth mother was chaotic. I had to take a lot of notes and try to keep track of her disconnected memories and try to put them into proper chronological order so that I could understand what her life was like and how it fit relative to historical developments and things we know that happened, in trying to do that, I came up with like 18 pages of an outline that I thought about. And I said, if I put words to this outline, I bet I get something close to 180 pages of text that I can find a ghostwriter and have them convert into a novel. Along the journey of trying to find a ghostwriter, I ran across, by happenstance, at a book fair that I, quite frankly, didn't even know it was a book fair. I thought it was like a farmer's market or something. All I saw was tents. So I went into this book fair, and I happened to enter the tent where publishers had stationed their tables. And when I described what I had, the woman that I met said, that's a manuscript. So I didn't know to call it a manuscript. She read a little bit of it. She said, this is your story. You have to tell this. And she proceeded to work with me for about a year, editing, adding, turning my stream of consciousness into something that could be published. Along the way, I learned a lot about myself, and I was afraid. I was afraid of being vulnerable, of putting my own voice or more of myself into what I'd already written. I felt the sequence of facts was as comfortable as I was going, as far as I was willing to go. I didn't want to really go much further than that. I didn't, but she forced me to kind of go through the process of editing this thing into something that would, in fact, be a book. And in so doing, I learned how to be vulnerable, I suppose, and be comfortable with being vulnerable. It's added a lot to my life as a result of letting go of some of that hesitation and fear associated with some of those emotions and feelings. Unlocking that has allowed me to become more in tune with myself, with other people. And it just helped me a lot. Yeah. It's been that whole process. I mean, I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't bumped into her in that tent, but again, call it what you want, fate, destiny, whatever. It clearly there was a guiding hand to put me in that tent in that moment of time with my project in hand.
All right, Mark. Thank you so much. So the women in your story feel incredibly authentic. Were they
Hmm.
inspired by real people? And how did you come to know or develop those characters?
Well, yeah, the mother, um, the, again, the search for the birth mother. I actually met her, and I used their real names, her and her mother. And so Maria Luisa Moresco is my maternal grandmother, and Kiera Moresco was my birth mother. Uh, Maria Luisa Moresco married a internationally renowned violinist by the name of Max Strub, and yeah, these were real people, and they led real lives. Ingrid Bergman wrote about Maria Luisa in his autobiography. He used a different name for her, but she was there. So these are like actual things that happen with these people, and having that as a rock, if you will, of landmarks to use to create the rest of the story. The other characters that pop up in the story are either characterizations of multiple people who were in their lives, or were the actual people that they interacted with. So that's why I say it in a lot of ways this story is biographical, because I am using the real names of these people, but at the same time, I don't know all the facts. So there's that element of fiction to weave the story together. Coming up with the characters and developing them into more of what they are as opposed to just a name was difficult. I had to ask myself a lot of questions like, why did they make this decision? What happened that they ended up in that town? How did they get there? What were they thinking at that moment in time? What was their reaction when XYZ happened? So I had to do a lot of role playing to try to get myself in a place where felt like I could channel the character in a very believable manner, and also in a way that as readers would be able to connect with them in one way or another. Some people have read it and said, wow, these are very difficult characters to connect with. They're not very, I can't be really sympathetic to them. It's like, no, that's okay too. They're not necessarily supposed to be heroes. They are, in a lot of ways, anti-heroes in that they're flawed people. They lived through difficult times. They made difficult decisions, and they weren't always the best decisions, and they weren't always the best towards each other. But they persisted, and in as much as they lived their lives, it ultimately led to mine, which is important too. So there's a lot of philosophy and emotions and psychology that builds up the character profiles that I use in my stories. I try to make it a deep experience, not just a story that gets told.
All right, Mark. Thank you. So moving on, Mark. Your novels are known for blending historical accuracy with emotional depth. How do you balance careful research with creating engaging and believable characters?
Yeah. that's a little bit of an art there. It's challenging because there are so many details you can get into with the history. As you're doing the research, there's just so many different nuances to things that are going on. There's political motivations. There's personal motivations in articles of war. There's all kinds of different generals and troop movements and personal agendas. A lot of it's very well documented, especially more recent history. I had more of a problem with this going back to Mask of Romulus, my other book. When I was doing research into ancient Rome, there's a lot written about Augustus and the Romans and the Roman Empire and Julius Caesar, but a lot of it has to do with two main fundamental things. The drama of what was going on inside the Senate itself and what was happening on the battlefields. Nobody really talks about the daily life of a Roman citizen hanging out in Rome, or what even some of these leaders that we have names for were doing when they were taking a day off. So filling in those types of details, filling in the details of a mother who has an unwed mother and has a baby girl in 1937 Italy. What is she thinking, and how is she acting, and how is she managing her apartment? And we go through a lot of effort today to childproof. They didn't childproof back then, but they probably had built a crib and struggled with that. We can all kind of have some sort of similarities in our own current lives for us to be able to say, I understand what that feels like. I understand that. So I try to bring those types of elements out, the meal, the food, the smells of spices. That's something that we all can connect with and understand. And I use those types of vehicles, if you will, to try to bring the story to life for the readers so that they can feel like they're immersed in the story, that they are sitting at that kitchen table at the same time. They can hear the baby crying. They can feel the frustration of an unwed mother trying to take care of a baby girl. They can feel the tension of listening to the radio, sitting at a different kitchen table at a different point in time, and listening to the newscast talking about the troop movements, so the Germans losing a battle, or the Russians are coming, or whatever the situation may be. Those types of mechanisms are kind of my vehicle of choice to try to create that immersive environment that, as a reader, as you're getting through it, you can connect with that emotion and you can connect with the element of the history, and that provides the balance that you're looking for as you're trying to tell the story.
Okay, so Marx of Romulus explores a fascinating chapter of ancient history. What drew you to the relationship between Rome and India, and what surprised you most during your research?
I was intrigued by a news article that talked about how archaeologists found this Hindu goddess, Lakshmi, in the ruins of Pompeii. And the question that came to my mind was, how did the Indian-focused religions, Buddhism or Hinduism, become so ingrained in Italian culture that there would be an ivory idol of a goddess from those religions in 68 AD when Vesuvius blew its stack and buried Pompeii in a bunch of ash? What was going on? So I started doing some research into the trade between Rome and India. I discovered there was actually quite a bit of that kind of activity going on. There's some other archaeology-based research that is going on the shores of the Red Sea, uncovering ancient ports that were used for purposes of trading up and down the Red Sea coast, from places like Eritrea and Ethiopia and India, all the way up into Rome and Greece. So I started getting fascinated by that, and then I tripped over this idea, this concept that Augustus made this all possible because he and his advisors or whatever cleared all the pirates out of the Mediterranean. That they spent an inordinate amount of time and energy chasing down and prosecuting or killing all of the pirates that were making maritime trade almost impossible on the Mediterranean during that time period. So I started digging in more about Augustus and what was it about him that made him interested in India trade, and I found out two interesting facts. The first interesting fact was that an Indian embassy, some entourage of representatives of India came to meet Augustus while he was on vacation on the island of Samos, which is off the coast of Turkey, in 21 BC. Suetonius is the historian who covers this. He only mentions it briefly, and he talks more about the monk that was in this entourage who throws himself in a fire when they go to Athens on their way towards Rome. The monk notwithstanding, how did these people get to the island of Samos in 21 BC? Why did they go to the island of Samos? How did they know Augustus was going to be there? This had to be extraordinarily well coordinated. During that time period, especially, there had been all kinds of people who were working behind the scenes to make sure that that would happen. This wasn't just like you're going to walk down the street and go get some milk and bread from the local store. This had to be really well planned out. So there was that. And then the second thing I found out was Augustus became Augustus because as a boy named Octavian, he was adopted, in essence, by Julius Caesar. Now, if my first book wasn't enough, and adoption wasn't already a big enough topic for me personally, and I hadn't just gone through this whole process of being super vulnerable and willing to talk about it in a much different way than maybe what is normally done, this sort of becomes a superpower at this point. And now I'm seeing this connection with this Augustus, who I had no idea that he was adopted, or that, the phrasing of adoption is a little different. They were using more of a succession planning. But in this particular case, Julius Caesar adopts Octavian because he sees a bright young boy who has a lot of potential and promise, and he gives him all of his wealth, which, as a young man, gives Octavian a tremendous amount of power and influence and ability to participate in things that are way beyond his 18 years of age, which is how old he was at the time. So it is a fascinating story of this interwoven elements of personal demons that Augustus faced, what drove him to be the man he became, and ultimately what type of influence did India have on him and the entire Roman Empire by virtue of that trade relationship. I paint a picture of a tremendous amount of interpersonal relations as well as cultural sharing between the two regions, because I feel like a lot of the teachings, a lot of the philosophies that came out of Rome after the time of Augustus reflected some of the same wisdoms and same philosophies that you see in ancient religions like Buddhism and Hinduism. So I am painting a picture there of this interrelationship, not only for economic gain, but also from emotional and spiritual gain as well. Probably more than you wanted to know, but
Not really, Mark. Thank you. So, I think what you have is a great story and a great work. Honestly, I just need to point that out before we move on. It's not really easy someone going there to put out their story, but someone once told me that my greatest, what I might have in my hands that might be something that will make me great, might just be my own story. So, and they encouraged me to be open to telling my story, because my story might be the great what God has given me to probably become great, and I might not know because I'm keeping the story to myself. So it's great that to see people who have courage to come out and tell their story. Mark, you are doing something very, very incredible.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. If nothing else, I hope what people will take away from this is that everybody has a story to tell. Whether you write a book about it or not is not the point. You can get a journal and just write the story out in that journal, and that will be good enough. But I think the process of writing your story out, the process of thinking about how you got to be who you are, and your family, your community, your trials, your traumas, your successes, your victories, all of it kind of comes together in a way that I think writing it out and kind of thinking about it and being introspective about it gives a lot of value. And it's a process that is very rewarding at the end. So I encourage everybody to think about that and to give themselves the freedom to write something down. It could be short stories. It doesn't matter. Write something down. I really believe in today's day and age, there's very little barrier to actually getting something published. Just the act of doing it all and putting it all together and self-publishing even is a worthwhile effort.
All right, Mark. So for those who would like to connect with you and get your book, how can they do that?
Yeah, probably the easiest thing to do. Everything's on Amazon, of course, Barnes and Noble as well. You can get a hold of me directly by filling out the contacts form on my website, which is mark-jamilkowski-author.com. And I'm more than happy to engage in additional dialogue. And I've got my blog, and I'm writing about my ongoing efforts with new projects, and I'm working on my third now. So it becomes a thing. I've been intrigued by it and building on this business model. I don't know if it's actually going to be viable as a business or not, but I'm enjoying the fact that people read my stories and they seem to like them a lot. And from that perspective, if I can make somebody feel something they didn't expect, if I can make somebody think something they didn't expect, that gives me a lot of satisfaction and fulfillment. So contact form at markjamilkowskiauthor.com is the way to get a hold of me directly, and the books are available on Amazon and Barnes and Noble. Thank you, Darlington.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking out your time to come to control or be controlled and share a story with us. So,
Absolutely.
Mark, yeah,
Yes, sir.
it's been a pleasure exploring the inspiration behind your novels and the passion you bring to historical fiction. For listeners out there, really, I admonish you guys to check out Mark's work and check out his story, and do well to share this episode so that his work can also go on to those who have not heard and those who don't know about what he is doing. Once again, Mark, have a wonderful day ahead.
Excellent. Thank you, Darlington. Really appreciated the chat today.
Thank you, Mark.